Amanda was standing in the darkness, beating her fists against the refrigerator door. The commotion had wrenched me out of a deep and dreamless sleep. When I crept down the hall to investigate, I'd had panicked thoughts of intruders stealing into the house to gut my family. But when I made it to the kitchen, I found only my wife, standing in a nightie, looking somewhat like an apparition, banging in a steady rhythm upon the hapless appliance. I nudged the dimmer switch up, in the hopes of shedding even just a little light on the situation. It didn't work. I still don't understand what was happening. "What's wrong?" I asked. "You don't hear that? That damn buzz." I listened. It was more of a hum than a buzz, I thought, and a very gentle one at that. One you wouldn't notice unless you were paying attention. That's how it always sounds. "No, it's broken. You don't hear that? It's so loud, I can't sleep. It's keeping me up." I nudged the switch a little higher now. I could see that Amanda wasn't kidding around. She looked positively haggard, and, in the light, even more like a ghost than she had in the dark. "It sounds normal," I said again. "That's what I was really afraid of." Amanda closed her eyes and spread a hand out across her face, gripping her temples with a thumb and middle finger. "It's in my head." "You hear a buzzing sound in your head?" I bit my lip. "Do you think—" Yes, I picked something up on my trip. God knows what it could be. I took all of my vaccines. Those don't work sometimes. So it would seem. I was groggy and wanting to get back to bed. "Well, we'll figure it out in the morning. We'll get you to the right doc, first thing. For now, try and get some sleep." "I can't. Take an Ambien. I've already had 3. It sounds like a damn beehive in there. Walt, it won't shut up." I looked at the clock. Work in 4 hours. "You've tried Tylenol?" "I've been awake all night. I've tried Tylenol, yes. I've tried reading the damn Bible too before you ask. I've tried everything. It won't stop." "Should we go to the ER? Wake up the kids and go to the ER? Or call an ambulance?" Amanda shook her head. "Just go back to bed, Walt. I'll be okay. Just go back to bed, and on your way out, kill that damn light." I did just that. A few hours later, with the sun creeping into the sky, I shut up the alarm clock and looked over to see that Amanda hadn't made it back to bed. I found her soon enough, sitting on the kitchen floor. She had pulled the refrigerator away from the wall and unplugged it. She looked wild and unhealthy. Less the ghost now, and more a decomposing corpse. "Honey? It won't stop. It'll never stop. I made you coffee." "The buzzing still?" I asked, pulling the mug out of the cabinet and pouring myself a cup. "Like a swarm of bees," she said. "No, like a swarm of angry wasps." "Never went to sleep, huh?" "Never did." "All right, I'm calling off work today and I'm taking you to Dr. Henderson." I looked down at her. She had a blank look on her face, and for a moment, I could vividly hear a buzzing in my own head. "We'll get you all fixed up." Jacob Henderson was a friend of mine. We played poker together every Friday night. I called his personal line to find him just on his way to the hospital and filled him in on my wife's condition. "Amanda's got it bad. This buzzing in her head that kept her up all night. We think she got it from stomping around in Thailand last week, though she was up to date on her vaccines." Well, I'll go ahead and clear a spot for her. Can you bring her in right away?" "Yes, thank you, Jake." I hung up and turned to Amanda. She was shivering now, her teeth audibly chattering. The sound made me shiver. "He said he can fit you in first thing. I'll drop you off, bring the kids to school, then come right back to check in on you." My wife gave no indication that she'd heard me. Amanda? Suddenly, she leapt to her feet and took off running, out of the kitchen and down the hall. After a moment, I heard a door slam shut. I followed behind to the bathroom door and knocked. Amanda? I was answered by a terrible, throaty retch, followed by a splash, as if a large volume of liquid being poured out over the tile floor. Aaron came out of his room, dressed in his pajamas, his hair sticking up in a cowlick, and asked, "Was that Mum? Is she okay?" "Your mother's feeling a bit under the weather today, but she'll be fine." From the bathroom, another retch, another splash. "I'm going to drop her off with Dr. Henderson, and he'll fix her right up. But I need your help this morning, okay, bud? I need you to go get your sister moving, and then the both of you ready for school, okay?" Aaron nodded and walked off to his sister's room. I tried the knob. Locked. "You okay in there, honey?" Silence. Or was it? I put my ear against the door. Not silence, but buzzing. Very faint buzzing, but definitely present. "Amanda, please answer." What if she'd passed out? Maybe she fell and hit her head on the way down. I decided to pick the lock. It was a privacy lock and would be easy to do with a straightened out paperclip. I pulled my head away from the door, and an instant later, there was a click, and Amanda slipped out of an opening that was barely big enough for her body to fit through. She closed the door behind her and kept her hand on the knob. "I'm fine, honey," she said. "Totally, 100% better. The buzzing's gone, and I feel fine. Just got a little sick. I'm thinking it was something I ate." She really did look better. Tired still, but no longer on the verge of death. "Well, let's have Dr. Henderson look you over anyway. It's all arranged." "No," she snapped. An ugly rage flashed across her face and then was gone, leaving a gentle smile in its wake. "I told you, I'm feeling quite well now." I didn't want to press the matter too insistently. Taking her to the hospital would mean missing work, and when I missed work, the work didn't magically disappear, but rather piled up on my desk. I was just getting over one ulcer and wanting to avoid another if possible. "You sure?" Amanda nodded. "If you're sure." "I am, but could you still take the kids in today? I'm going to clean up in the bathroom, then hit the hay. I'm beat." "Of course." I nodded at the door. "Let me just do my business in there and I'll be out of your hair." No, you can't go in there. It's embarrassing. Nothing I haven't seen before. Come on now, I'll be late. Use the kids' bathroom. This one is a war zone. I can't let you in there." I shrugged. I was getting ready to turn around when I heard that buzzing sound again. A little louder now, coming from the other side of the door. What's that sound? That buzz? Amanda was silent for a beat, then let out a mechanical laugh. It didn't sound like her at all. "Now you're the one hearing a buzz. Maybe you should consult with Dr. Henderson yourself after you drop off the kids. You probably have a case of what I had. It's not fun at all, I promise you that." Something's off about her, I thought. Then, sure there is. She's been up all night and just puked her guts out. Relax. It didn't look fun, no. I headed off to the kids' bathroom. As soon as I was a few steps down the hall, I heard Amanda open the door again. I stopped and turned to see her disappear back inside. With the door open, the buzzing grew temporarily louder. There's something in there. It's not in my head. But then I realized Amanda had spent all night in front of the refrigerator, convinced that the noise was coming from there, even after I'd borne witness to the contrary. Maybe I do have a bit of food poisoning. I put the matter out of my mind and went about my day. That afternoon, at the crest of a wave of progress against my towering workload, I got a call from my kids' school. Amanda hadn't picked them up. Normally, she picked them up. The school secretary said that she'd tried the other numbers listed before mine, but none of them had reached the human being. I was a little put out, but figured, fair enough. Amanda had a rough night and needs the rest. She's probably off in dreamland right now. I picked up Aaron and Margaret and, to their delight, took them out for ice cream. I wanted to give my wife a little extra time to sleep before I dropped the kids off with her and went back to work. But I did need to get back to it. So as soon as we got home and the kids went barreling off for their toys, I went to my bedroom, bracing myself for the unpleasant but necessary task of awakening my wife. But my wife wasn't in our bedroom. Amanda? I knew that she was home because her car was in the driveway. But if not in bed, then where? And why wasn't she answering her phone? I walked through the house, calling her name, sticking my head into each room. When I got to the hall bathroom, I was greeted by a closed door and an undeniable buzz. Something was very wrong. A part of me wanted to pretend that it wasn't, and to just keep walking down the hall, out the door and into my car, back to the office to make some more progress, make some more money. But no, that was my wife in there. I loved her. We'd made vows and had children together, who were now playing in their living room, oblivious to any kind of danger. I couldn't abandon them either, though some dark and primal urge, stirred by the buzzing sound, was telling me to run for my life no matter the cost. Amanda had been right. It really did sound like a swarm of angry wasps. It was menacing in a way that was both organic and mechanical, which, I suppose, was true enough of wasps. Single-minded drones, like programmed robots, but alive too, and looking, finally, for nothing more than an excuse to plunge their poisonous stingers into your flesh. I knocked on the door. Amanda? I knew that she wouldn't answer, but I hoped that she would. I hoped that she was in there, perfectly fine, having just woken up from a nap, and that the buzzing was from a use of some kind of electrical device. Let it be a vibrator if need be. Hell, let her be in there with the defense line of the Dallas Cowboys. Her only requirement that they trim their pubic hair with an electric razor before she sucks them off. Let it be anything other than the unspeakably awful thing that I knew it absolutely would be, even as I didn't know the specifics of what that nightmare would manifest itself as. I took a breath and tried the knob that I knew wouldn't turn. It didn't. The buzzing seemed to intensify, becoming agitated by my attempts at intrusion. There was no more procrastinating. I made my way through the living room, where Aaron and Margaret were engaging in a mock battle between superheroes. "Super freeze!" cried my daughter. "It didn't work," said my son. "I drank some antifreeze before I got here." In the study, I rummaged through my desk drawers until I found a paperclip. I straightened it out with unsteady hands and wielded it, past my playing children, back to the bathroom door. Just get it over with, I thought, sticking the wire into the small hole in the knob. I wiggled it around a bit until I heard the click of the lock coming undone. I was almost grateful for the sound of my pulse thudding in my head as I pushed the door open. It temporarily drowned out the droning buzz coming from within. There, inside the bathroom, was my wife, Amanda. She was stark naked and crouched above what looked like a writhing ball of insect larvae and human feces. Some of the larger larvae were emerging from this central mass and crawling all over Amanda, finding a suitable piece of flesh and attaching themselves there to suck out the final bit of sustenance needed to become adults. Above her head, hanging from the ceiling, was a nascent nest, swarmed by what did indeed look like wasps, striped black and yellow, buzzing and nasty. Amanda was twitching all over, but otherwise unmoving. Her eyes were blank and her face was slack. She was, I realised, gone. Overtaken, body and mind, by these parasitic wasps. One of them had found her, probably while she was in Thailand, and had laid its eggs inside of her. Did it do this through a sting, or by crawling into her mouth while she slept? No matter the method, the insect had succeeded, and the eggs thrived in my wife's body, protected from the outside world. She gave them a free ride to America, back to our house, and then, when they were ready to hatch, she had vomited them up on the bathroom floor. There, in various stages of development, they had fed all day, either on a mess or on a blood. They grew fast into adults, who now swarmed around her head and plucked the hair off her head in order to build their nest. I understood this on instinct, like how a mouse understands a cat. Come to think of it, there was a parasite for that too. Toxoplasma gondii, which thrives in cats, but will settle initially for a mouse. The parasite's special talent was to make the rodent unafraid of felines and so easy prey. The cat, without sport, would eat the oblivious mouse, its flight function disengaged, and the parasite would get what it wanted all along, to live on and reproduce in the cat. Life can be a nasty business all round. My own fear response, however, remained fully intact, and even as I took in the scene before me, as the thoughts swirled in my head, contributing to the discordant symphony in there, alongside the organic and mechanical buzz and the pounding pulse, I retreated. I slammed the door behind me and braced myself against the wall in front of me, dizzy. Good God, what do I do? Amanda was beyond help, it seemed. There was no coming back from that. Her mind, and so her body, had been taken over by them, in the same way that certain other species of parasitic wasps will take over the body of a spider and have it spin a protective cocoon around them, or how certain fungi will take over the minds of ants, turning them into half-dead slaves under their control. Nobody quite knew how it worked, only that it did work, and was terrifying. Those things were in there, all too rapidly growing into adults, building their nest. Amanda's body would serve them for a while, but once that resource was depleted, they'd want to be seeking other hosts, seeping through every crack, looking for fresh meat. Maybe that would happen sooner rather than later. Maybe they were already searching for the exit. I turned slowly and looked at the crack under the door. In horror, I tore off my shirt and spread it around the door, attempting to blockade the gaping gateway between this horrible world of the bathroom and this world. In even more horror, I looked down at my naked arm to see one of them on there, crawling. I slapped at it madly until it was mush. Had it stung me? Or was that just from the sting of my own slaps? Get the kids out of there, then call the police or call an exterminator to burn down the house. Just get out of there. I ran into the living room and grabbed my kids roughly by their arms, dragging them along behind me. Did it sting me? Did it inject me with its nightmare eggs? Are there more on me? Did it sting me? Is it too late? Are they right behind us, giving chase? Did it sting me? As my mind screamed, my children screamed. That hurts, Dad. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? I didn't stop to explain. I kept running, praying that the buzzing that filled my head was only the sound of my nerves sizzling out. I am told that when the police arrived at the scene, my wife was already dead. After some pressing on my part, an officer disclosed that there was no writhing ball of lava in the tile floor, nor any lava attached to Amanda's body, but that there was a massive nest hanging from the ceiling with a thick swarm of adult wasps encircling it. It happens, the officer said. They'll build a nest wherever they can. He shuddered. Nasty buggers. do you really think we wouldn't notice a colony of wasps building a giant nest in our bathroom? How long does that normally take? Weeks? And we didn't notice? I was frustrated because nobody believed my story about some sort of supercharged species of parasitic wasps. Wasps might take over the body of a ladybug, I was told, but no species exists that can take over the body of a person. And yet, no other really plausible explanation for what had happened was proffered. I certainly would have noticed it, the officer admitted. But then again, I'm trained to observe my environments at all times. I'm trained to notice the slightest detail out of place. I tried a different approach. The nest was made out of a hair. You tested that, right? Lots of stray hairs in a bathroom, available to anyone or anything looking for such material. I sat in disbelief for a moment, across the desk from this officer. I knew that I couldn't convince him of the truth. He'd already made up his mind. The truth lay in matters beyond his knowledge and understanding of the world, and, rather than expand his understanding of the world, he had chosen to contort the truth and make it fit. This is how the world will end, I thought. After days and nights of mourning and erratic sleep characterized by terrifying nightmares, I had little emotion to lend the thought. There was only a flicker of rage. Let me review. According to what you're telling me, a massive colony of wasps was picking up my wife's stray hair for weeks on end and building a huge nest in our bathroom completely without our notice. And then, one day, Amanda undresses to get into the shower, and lo, she finally noticed the enormous nest. The sudden sight frightens her so much that she defecates and then drops dead of a heart attack. The marks all over her body. An unexplained but unrelated rash of some sort. Case closed. Is that right? Unfortunately, sir, that's the long and short of it. I know that it's hard to hear. It seems such an undignified way to go. If it makes you feel better, I saw that nest with my own eyes, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I peed myself. There's no shame in being human. Those buggers are scary. One of them got me in the neck while I was there. I'll tell you, the only worse thing than getting stung by one of those things is getting shot, which I have been. The officer patted his shoulder. Right here. You got stung? All in the line of duty. I stood up. Well, I have to thank you for your time. I needed some closure, I suppose, and now I have it. The officer smiled. I'm very sorry about your wife, sir. The only advice that I can give is to hang in there. Life goes on. You'll see. Even now, somebody needs your attention. It's okay. You can go ahead and answer your phone right now. It must be important. The damn thing's been buzzing for 5 minutes straight. My phone was in the car, with the kids. It can wait. Thank you again, and good luck. I left his office and walked outside. The sky was overcast. The investigation was complete, as was the fumigation, and the kids and I were due to move back into our house. We were, in fact, on our way to do just that. But suddenly, it seemed like a good idea to go somewhere very far away instead. Do you have control over your skeleton? I thought I did. Assumed I, as in my brain, controlled the 206 bone framework to which my skin had been attached, and in which my organs were housed. I think most people share that assumption about themselves, so I'm sure you can imagine my surprise when I found out that my skeleton could operate independently of my command. A fairly horrific revelation, to be honest. I was walking down the sidewalk at about 8 p.m, heading from my apartment to the nearby grocery store for some last-minute shopping, when I saw someone sitting on a park bench, convulsing. They were dressed appropriately for the weather, and, aside from their behavior, didn't appear to be accustomed to a life on the street, meaning their hair was properly groomed and I could see no holes, stains, or tears on their clothes. So, I determined they weren't a tweaked out bum and approached cautiously, offering my assistance. The person in question was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a burgundy beanie, dark green and considerably plump winter coat and black leggings. Her head was bowed and her hands rested in her lap. Her attention seemed to be focused on the hands, which wore black gloves. The convulsions originated at the hands and reverberated throughout the rest of her body. She trembled violently, and her hands contracted as if a powerful electric current ran through them. Shocked but curious, I asked her what exactly was wrong, and when she did not respond, I nudged her shoulder. This got her attention, and she looked up at me with the most terrified and agonized face I'd ever seen. Her lips tried to form words, but with each attempt she faltered, and I was left to try and glean the cause of her fright and pain from her wide, terror-filled eyes. On a hunch, I reached down and removed the glove that covered her right hand, placed it in the side pocket of my jacket, while assuring her that I'd return it once I got a look at her hand. At worst, I expected a very minor case of frostbite, given the temperatures which had already started to rise from its frigid beginnings of yesterday. But what I found was something far worse, and plainly inexplicable. Her hand had sprouted several fingers from the palm, between the ordinarily present 5 and front of the wrist. None of the fingers had skin around them, only bone protruded from the flesh of the hand. The bones moved slowly, and each small motion seemed to bring an intense pain to the woman. Small rivulets of blood ran from the exit wounds of each protrusion, and smears of crimson on the bones gleamed in the illumination of the streetlight overhead. The woman's stare intensified, and though she still could not speak, she practically shouted with that gaze, pleaded with me to help her in some way. But I am no doctor, and nor am I well versed in anything pertaining to medical treatment, certainly not for something like this, so I slipped the glove back on her hand, eliciting a howl of anguish from the woman, and ran off. I was understandably terrified. When I arrived at my apartment, I went to my kitchen, intending to make some coffee to warm myself up. I hadn't gone to the grocery store, and therefore didn't have any coffee, so I settled for brewing some Earl Grey tea, then sat at my humbly bare kitchen table. I was still rattled from the encounter with a woman, and something within myself, some intrinsic, newly awakened insight, warned me to stay away, to resist any lull which would draw me into unconscious rest. I hadn't removed my jacket, which I did after taking a few sips of my tea. In the process of doing so, I felt a strange lump on my side, just near my ribcage. I fully removed the jacket, lifted my shirt and felt around, and sure enough, a portion of my skin had been elevated to a bulbous lump. I quickly made my way to the bathroom, startled in that vague yet intense way when faced with some unseen bodily ailment, and examined myself in the mirror's reflection. There, plain as day on my side, was a lump, extending from an otherwise level surface to about 3 inches. With each passing second, it lengthened, until I'd watched it grow from 3 inches to about a foot. The skin, by that point, had gave way at the tip, revealing the glistening white of bone. At the base, other lumps had formed and began growing with similar rapidity outward, making my side resemble the spike hide of a porcupine. I, as would anyone in my position, promptly fainted. I was awakened by a bodily shifting, as if shaken awake. When I came to, I was met with quite a horrifying picture. A portion of what resembled a human skeleton had emerged from my side and was presently trying to pull more of itself from my body. This other collection of bones, or extension of my own, was comprised of half a ribcage fused with collarbones, which were in turn fused with humerus, radius, and ulna, though in strange, anatomically impossible, and certainly inhuman ways. The whole connection lacked supportive muscle tissue, and yet acted as if it had no need of such things. Blood, of course, had been splattered everywhere, and perhaps to apply some sort of logic to the whole bizarre scene, my mind's first thought was to seal the wound and stop the blood loss. But of course, that brought me right back to the most prominent issue, the thing that had made the wound, and which was presently making it larger as it tried to withdraw further portions of itself from my body. Acting quickly, though probably not sensibly, I swatted away the monstrous appendage and tried to stand. This attempt was met with immediate failure, and I fell back to the bathroom floor. The resultant rattle as the bone collided with the tile was nightmarish, and I hastened my attempts to escape, this time in a crawl. I managed to open the door. Why'd I even close it? And briefly considered slamming it shut while the hellish growth still remained in the room, but an instant later decided against it. There was too much risk of harm to myself. Some subconscious impulsion directed me to my hall closet, in which I stored my tools. My body, apparently aware of what must be done, had already retrieved my hammer before my mind caught up with the process of thought. I raised the hammer, still half upright on the floor, trailing that sickly extension, and brought it down on the thing. The first strike accomplished nothing, beyond sending a painful, reverberant wave through my body. The second strike, aimed at the same point as before, was more successful. I shattered the point of impact, which had been a single, thick, trunk-like extension of bone that joined the rest of it to my body. I expected pain, since I was still under the impression that these were mere elongations of myself. But the brutal severance wasn't particularly painful. The severed bundle writhed and flopped about, knocking against the wood paneling of the floor. It was a nightmarish sight, and I held tightly onto the hammer in case I needed to strike it, should it attempt to reattach itself to me. After a while, perhaps 20 seconds, it ceased motion and lay immobile. My side still bled, so I crawled towards the kitchen, all the while eyeing the discarded bones, and retrieved a towel. I made my way back to the closet and used some duct tape to affix the towel tightly to my side, stopping the bleeding. I decided that I required answers and would face the woman to explain what the hell had happened to me. I left the still dead, or at least dormant, collection of discarded bones on the floor and crawled to the kitchen, where I retrieved my jacket. I hoisted myself onto a chair, and after grabbing my kitchen's broom, I broke the handle in half, creating a makeshift cane. I then left the apartment, hobbling into the night. I found the woman, although she by that point wouldn't have been recognizable as such if I hadn't already met her. On the bench sat something which could pass for human from a distance, but upon coming closer would reveal itself to be no more than an empty husk of who it had once been. Skin and clothing both had been torn to make way for the quick and assuredly violent emergence of something which had dwelled beneath those layers. Leading from the discarded wrappings was a crimson trail which entered the nearby woods. I followed it, even though every single instinct told me to flee, to distance myself from the whole scene. I stumbled through those shadowy draped trees for what seemed like an hour, my stride faltering many times, and eventually came to a lesser corpse, where the trees gave each other greater space, and where darkness in turn had retreated somewhat, the moonlight giving greater stay among the wood. Before me, affixed, bored into, and hanging from nearly every tree, were countless bones, The entire grove had been transformed into some horrific ossuary. Tibias, femurs, entire skulls, costal fragments, anything you can imagine of the human skeleton existed among the trees, emerged from the soil, or had been implanted into even the small and large stones of the area. Spinal columns had been wrapped around tree trunks, snaking up and down them hideously, and smears of marrow stained the plant life, blotting out the natural green of the area and illuminated terribly by the moonlight. And, in the center of it all, environed by the unnatural ossification, were two figures. The first, a complete skeleton, and, judging by its general structure, one of a female. It toiled with planting metatarsals into the soil. The other figure, a near-complete human skeleton, though smaller and apparently male, was reaching up towards a tree branch, hammering vertebrae into the limb. I stared, transfixed in terror, as the two skeletons performed their weird, mausolean task. Their actions, the whole scene, was arguably profane, an affront to the sanctity of life itself, a sanctity I hadn't really acknowledged until that moment when I saw those impossibly animate creatures and their monstrous work. I must have exhaled, coughed, or otherwise vocally expressed my mounting repulsion, because they simultaneously turned their vacant skulls towards me, and I peered in those disconcerting, vacant sockets. There was no life there, nothing perceptible with my human senses, but there was an evil impression about them, some demonian aspect which seemed to radiate invisibly from their forms. My repulsion turned to rage, and I found myself advancing, with my walking stick raised to strike. Some ancestral, or perhaps merely primal impulse took command of my body, insisting that I thwart the assuredly evil plot at hand. Man must triumph over evil, intimated my DNA. But I fell, face first into the mud, scratching the skin of my left cheek of my coccyx. I swear I heard a sinister cackling come from the abominable figures, but I did not let it reduce my spirits, and I rose quickly, determined to crush them, just as I crushed the costal extension that had born itself out of my own body. But by the time I'd risen to stand, the bone men had repositioned, with one in front of me and behind as well. The flanking bowman delivered a swift and powerful strike to my back, and an instant later, the forefront skeleton delivered an equally devastating strike to my chest, dispersing the wind from my lungs. I fell, defeated, and lost consciousness for the second time that night. I awoke in the morning to the sound of screaming. A woman in winterwear stood over me, wailing like an idiot. A husband or boyfriend held her, but made no attempt to silence his partner. Around me, the grove existed, as I'm sure it had the other night, prior to the infernal one I'd experienced. No bones could be seen anywhere. Upon realizing that I'd laid on the ground, I tried to upright myself, but found that only my right arm responded to the desired action. My left arm did not move, and, upon examining it, I found that what had once been a moderately toned arm was now just a bag of skin, with a gaping hole torn into the wrist. I immediately arrived at the conclusion that the bones had been exercised via this tear. Pain, hot, never before imagined pain, arrived at this recognition, and my anguished howling drowned out the pitiful screams of the woman. It wasn't until I arrived at the hospital later that I learned my other limbs had suffered a similar fate as that of my arm. I was a deflated, half-skeletal vestige of a once fit human being. I, of course, could not offer the doctors an explanation as to how I came to be in such a state, and floated the suggestion that someone had mugged me in the park and stolen my bones for whatever reason. According to them, the fact that I was even alive was a miracle, but I didn't want to push their tolerance of the supernatural by providing the truth to the incident. I was thankful to be alive, and my heart burned with a renewed fury for the wicked thieves. I was kept at the hospital for rest and observation for 2 weeks. I have excellent insurance, before eventually being released to my apartment. I was not surprised when I found no trace of the bones which I had severed all those nights ago. I was given a caretaker, also a gift of my gracious medical insurance, who looked after me closely and kindly. She provided me with a microphone and the accompanying software at my request. I don't know the reason behind all this. I don't know why those fiends of bones were transforming the grove into some isolated and ossuary hellscape. But I will not rest until I find out why. I do think that the affliction, natural or otherwise, is infectious. When I put the woman's glove in my pocket, I must have contracted the bone-sprouting disease. Anyway, I'll leave this record in the hopes that others who experience such atrocities may contact me and assist me in stopping whatever black plot is underway. I work for an air conditioning company that mainly handles residential and small commercial work. We do basic maintenance, but our more profitable work, and the work I spend most of my time doing, is installing new HVAC systems. Over the last 5 years at the job, I've seen a few odd requests, custom work or heating and cooling spaces with unique problems. But when I saw the service note that just said underneath and listed an address out in the country, I stopped by the dispatcher's office on my way to the door. "Hey Ma, I know you get busy with calls, but can you give me more info on a new service call than this?" I held up the service note and tapped the word underneath. I like to be a little prepared before I get there, and I don't know what this means. Do you remember the call? Marisol rolled her eyes away from her monitor, favouring me with a bored look before glancing down at the slip of paper I held. Her eyes widened slightly as she broke into a grin. "Oh yeah, I remember that one. Older lady called it in yesterday. Or she sounded older, I don't know. Anyway, she said she's renovating a house, has a large crawl space underneath that she wants sealed up and climate controlled." I frowned at her. "Wait, what? Are you sure she doesn't just want duct tape replaced or something?" Marisol glared at me before going back to looking at her monitor. "No, Daniel, I asked her that. She was very specific. She wants underneath the house to be heated and cooled too." I thought about questioning it further, but I realised there was no point. Poor note-taking aside, Marisol did a good job. If she said that's what she asked for, that was probably what was asked for. Though I still guess the customer had made some kind of mistake, or at the very least, didn't appreciate how expensive it would be. Well, I thought, I can always find out more when I meet them. Except, I didn't meet them. I showed up at the address that afternoon to find a sprawling 3-story house that was locked up and empty. No signs of anyone living there or remodeling work being done. I did a circle of the house, and it was as I was completing my circuit that I noticed a large, dark blue envelope taped to the front door. I didn't know how I'd missed it when I first arrived, its deep indigo hue jumping out from the white door to which it was attached. But I pushed the thought away as unimportant. I saw it now, and it was clearly a note meant for me. Written in large, neat script across the envelope's front were the words, "For the HVAC person." It's not uncommon to get notes from customers, but the way this was done, from the thickness and colour of the paper to the letter that it held inside, it all carried a strange formality that I didn't care for. I think it was because it didn't feel like a reminder or a little instruction from a client. It felt like an invitation. Still, it had taken 45 minutes to get out there, and I needed to get the inspection and estimate done if I could. Maybe the contents of the envelope would explain better than the service note or Marisol had been able to. So, I opened it, found a sheet of thick paper folded neatly inside and covered in the same large and orderly handwriting as the envelope itself. And this is what it said. To the service provider. As mentioned on the phone, I am remodeling this house before I move in. This property has several unique features, one of which is a spacious crawl space on top of concrete slab. It stands approximately 5 feet at all points, and I have uses for that space that require cooling and heat, as well as proper ventilation. I need the crawl space sealed and an HVAC system installed. Please note that this system needs to be wholly separate from the systems for the interior of the house, within some reason. The cost is of no concern. Please inspect the property, provide your estimate, and I will confirm it within 24 hours. I will then provide any prepayment your company requires by the end of the week. Thank you for your time, your expertise, and your discretion. I still didn't understand the point of any of it, but I didn't have to. Yeah, the letter was slightly creepy, but that wasn't a good reason to turn down a big job, especially with the holidays coming up. I reread the letter to make sure I hadn't missed anything, and then I went back to my truck to get my coveralls. As it turned out, I didn't really need them. The crawl space was just as big as the letter had said, but it was also immaculately clean. I mean spotless. No dirt, no dead bugs, no signs of mice or spiders, or anything you'd normally find under a house. In fact, except for the low headspace, it was easy to forget that you weren't in an unfinished floor of a house or a basement. Part of that was the concrete floor. It ran the entire length and width of the house, making me wonder if the builders hadn't started with a slab of foundation and then changed their minds when they decided they wanted a giant crawl space instead. There was no telling how much extra that had cost, but it did have the side benefit of making my job easier. It took less than 30 minutes for me to get all the measurements I needed and get back to my truck. A few minutes more, and I had emailed the office my estimate for them to send out to the customer. The crawl space was over 3,000 square feet, and I estimated it would take about $12,000 and 2 weeks to do the whole job if they sent one of the newer guys to help me. Despite what the letter said, I had a feeling the cost would be a concern when they saw that figure, and I thought I would probably never hear from this potential client again. I was wrong. By the end of that week, everything was agreed upon and half paid up front, and by the following Tuesday, I was out there reviewing everything I would need to start the work the following day. Most of that was just walking around the house and making a supply and tool checklist, but as I worked, I kept getting sidetracked by the weirdness of it all. Not just the job, or never talking directly with the owner, but the house itself. Looking through the windows, I could see polished floors of light wood and walls that looked clean and freshly painted. No furniture, but all that meant that the woman hadn't moved in yet. Still, it struck me as strange that there was nothing in the house. No trash or cleaning supplies, no forgotten water bottle or fast food bag, no signs of anyone having been inside the house at all. It reminded me of Santa's elf village. When I was 7, my parents took me to the mall to see Santa. Not just any mall Santa, but the Santa at the huge new mall over the state line. The Santa who travelled on his own magical elf village. It had taken us 2 hours to get there, and when I was smaller, my parents likely wouldn't have bothered going that far just for me to see a fancier mall Santa. But that was before my little sister, Kennedy, had gone missing in a grocery store 2 years earlier. She had been with my mother at the time, perched in the shopping cart's toddler seat while my mom was turned away looking for bread or peas or something. And when Mom turned back, Kennedy was gone. She started yelling right away, but neither my sister or whoever snatched her were found, and the investigation that followed turned up nothing. There were no witnesses, no security footage, no suspects. Just an empty hole in our family where my little sister used to be. That first year after she was gone had been terrible. My parents cried and argued all the time, and even at 6, I'd wondered if they were going to stay together. But around the time that Kennedy had been gone a year, I caught pneumonia and had to be in the hospital for a couple of days. I don't know what it was, but something brought them back together. Maybe their shared terror of losing their other child made them realize that they still had things worth living for. Either way, from that point on, they seemed to focus all their energy on spending time with me and making me happy, spoiling me really. I wasn't a bad kid. I don't think I turned into a brat or anything. And it wasn't that I didn't appreciate the extra toys and special treatment, as well as getting more attention from parents that had always seemed a bit distracted and distant when I was younger. I definitely did appreciate it, at least in theory. The problem was that when they spent time with me or carried me somewhere fun, there was always this quiet desperation on their faces, some weird, hungry look that said they needed me to have fun, to be happy, to be safe, that they needed to atone for what happened to my sister, and the only thing they could come up with was to try and make my childhood as good as possible. That's how we wound up in a distant mall, my parents alternating between giving me brittle smiles and passing frantic looks between themselves. That is how I wound up seeing Santa's elf village. It dominated the center of the mall, with lines of kids and parents waiting to see the man himself, an area to the near left for pictures, and a small kiosk to the far left where you could pick up a photo of your child talking to Santa in an overpriced plastic frame. But to the right was the elf village. It wasn't much of a village really, just 3 small houses made out of plaster or something, the colour rubbed off the edges of the roof and corners by the corrosive effects of time and rough use. Still, there was a sign that said you could look through a peephole into one of the elves' homes. I don't remember everything from that day, but I remember being excited as I got up to the elf store and put my eye against the peephole. I knew it was all pretend, but it was still fun to see whatever they might want to show me. On the surface, it was simply a shabby presentation of a small and cozy elf house. There was a little kitchen area and a small chair sitting in front of a tiny stone fireplace. A tea kettle sat on a nearby table atop a yellowing lace doily. It was probably meant to be cute. Something that was probably meant to match the child's idea of an elf's house, and instead came across as a cheap knockoff version of the kind of place a hobbit might live. And I didn't find it cute. I didn't find it funny. I felt my breath quicken as I looked at it, my eyes combing over every detail, trying to find something comforting that would make the wrongness of it less wrong. It wasn't that it was disturbing in any obvious way, but there was this artificiality to it, a worrying lifelessness that made it clear that this wasn't just make-believe. It was a lie, a trick. I'd backed away from the elf's house quickly after that. I still hadn't seen Santa, which was the whole point of the long trek to the mall. But when I said I wanted to go, my parents passed another look between each other and then quickly agreed. I kept waiting for them to complain, to question why I suddenly got scared. But they never did. Instead, they took me for ice cream, and we never talked about it again. 4 years later, my father was leaving his office late one night when a car came around the corner and ran him down at the edge of the lot where he'd parked. I've never seen it, but apparently there was a grainy video from a nearby bank security camera that showed the car's headlights for a brief moment, but the driver didn't stop, and they never learned who it was or why it happened. When I was 13, my best friend, Andy Murphy, was sent to hospital to get his appendix out. He died on the operating table when someone messed up his anesthesia. I remember his dad drunkenly telling me that the doctor had said it was a freak accident, that there was like a 1 in 100,000 chance of something like that happening. By that point, I wasn't so sure. I had just started college when my mother was murdered. Someone broke in on her. The police told me that they didn't seem to take anything or do anything other than tie up my mother, cut her a little, and then set her on fire. As with everything else that had happened in my life, there was never any real explanation, never a face or name to which I could assign blame. No one was ever caught, and a few months later, everyone stopped looking or caring. But I still care. I care about all of it. And it may sound stupid, but I know that I'm cursed somehow. Nothing much ever happens to me personally, but to the people around me, the people I'm really close to, something always gets them, and there's only one common denominator: me. So I don't make close friends anymore. I do my work, I act polite, and I go home and keep to myself. No friends, no significant others, no new victims for the meat grinder that seems to have followed patiently behind me all the days of my life. And while it's a lonely life, it's not a terrible one. I enjoy my work, and I'm good at it. Bigger jobs like this, I have to have physical help, but I make sure not to get too friendly with anyone they send. And if I start getting too used to someone in particular helping me, I ask the company to swap them out for someone new. It sucks, but it's safer that way. After backing away from the windows of the empty house, I headed back into the crawl space to make sure I didn't need to do any cleaning prep before I started sealing the following morning. The thought of whether I should request someone new to help me with the ductwork and unit installation, or stick to the guy I'd used for the last few times, was preoccupying me. But just behind it was a line of guilty thoughts and bad memories stretching back to that elf village and beyond. I was usually good at not dwelling on my childhood, and I'd come to accept the limitations of my life if I didn't want to risk someone getting hurt by whatever had marked me. But it was still hard. It was all so damn hard, and I didn't know what I'd done to deserve. Where had that crack come from? The concrete slab that served as the floor of the crawl space wasn't one giant seamless piece. It was made up of several smaller squares that joined at the seams between the pieces of concrete. There was a small gap between each of them, which was normal to allow for expansion and contraction during the hot or cold months. The acrylic spray sealer I was going to use the next day could bridge those small gaps without too much problem, and I made sure, during my first visit, that there weren't any obvious problems with the floor that would require some kind of fix with the sealant to hold. No big or irregular gaps between the pieces of concrete, in other words. But now there was a large space, more than 6 inches wide, between two of the slabs. Crouch walking over to it, I felt the first stirrings of confused fear. It wasn't just a gap. It was an opening. There was empty air underneath, almost like there was an open space down there below the concrete. My heart was starting to beat faster as I reached out and touched the slab that seemed out of place. The beating turned to hammering as the slab slid further at the slightest force, gliding out of the way through some unseen and silent mechanism. It wasn't a slab at all. It was a hidden door, I shine my flashlight down into the dark below, wincing as lights began to flare to life beneath me. Blood was beating in my ears as my eyes adjusted, and I saw steps going down into a small, subterranean hallway. It was some kind of hidden basement, bare except for the stairs, a door at the far end, and a small table containing what looked like a photograph and another dark blue envelope. I was terrified. This was some kind of intentional trap, or I'd accidentally stumbled into some creepy secret basement. And either way, I needed to get out of there and call the office. But then I realized. I recognized the picture on the table. It was a photo of Kennedy, taken just a few weeks before she disappeared. I sat, frozen for a second, tensed and terrified, as I looked back and forth between the room and the shadowy corners of the crawl space. How was any of this possible? And if it was real, did that mean whoever took her was now messing with me? If so, there was all the more reason I should call for help, right? I dug into my pocket and got out my cell phone to call 911, even as I remembered that I had no service this far out. I tried to call anyway, but after the third time, I stuffed the phone back into my pocket and looked back down at the photo. It was a little far away, but I could see it well enough. It was her. It was impossible, but it was her. So I went down. The stairs were metal and seemed sturdy as I walked down them slowly, repeatedly telling myself I would be ready to run at the first sign of trouble. I reached the small wooden table and picked up the photo with a trembling hand. I hadn't seen this photo since my mother had been buried with it. As far as I knew, that was the only copy, and I'd buried it with her charred remains when the state investigators gave me her body back for the funeral. Shaking my head slightly, I set the photo down and picked up the envelope. It was addressed to me, though more specifically this time, to Daniel. It took me 3 tries to steady my hands enough to open it, and when I did, I found another single, thick sheet of paper inside. This one simply said, "To better understand, you must go deeper in." Underneath that, as though to clarify the point, there was a rough drawing of a door, just like the one at the end of the hall. The door was uneven somehow. It seemed perceptibly narrower at the top than at the bottom, and there was a mark near the top that I'd never seen before and didn't understand, but which was cruelly replicated on the drawing as well. Whoever was behind this, they wanted me to go inside. I felt sure it was a trap at this point, certain that if I did anything but try to run, I would only get trapped down here in some serial killer's dungeon, and I was definitely scared by the thought. But I was also angry and confused, and I could feel my need for answers overriding my fear for the moment. Could see my body moving toward the door rather than the stairs. And when the door opened easily, I went into the second room. It was largely the same as the first. There was a door at the far end and a table in the middle. The table contained 2 more photos and another envelope. The first photo was a smiling, nondescript photo of my father I'd never seen before. It almost looked like a driver's license photo, but I couldn't say for sure. He looked to be slightly younger than what I remembered when he died, but it was clearly him. The second photo was harder to identify. It was a burned up body, twisted and blackened by flames. It looked like it had only recently stopped burning. Though the picture wasn't the best quality, I thought I could even see a thin thread of grey smoke trailing up from what had once been an arm. I knew who it was, of course. Who else could it be? I felt tears springing up in my eyes as I looked away from the body to the distant corner of the picture. I recognized the room. It was my mother's living room, the place she'd been burned alive. I dropped the photo as I doubled over, retching. Nothing came up after several heaves, and after a few seconds, I managed to stand back up slowly, my hand landing on the envelope as I touched the table for support. Fighting the urge to tear the envelope into little pieces unread, I instead made myself open it gently. This could all be evidence. I needed to try and not disturb it more than I could help. A dim voice told me I should go and get help now. Let the police deal with this. But I ignored it. I was in this now. I needed to see it through. I needed to know. I have always been with you. I have watched and shaped your life since you were born. I crumpled the letter without thinking, and then, disgusted with myself, I sat the wad of paper gently back on the table before striding toward the next door. The last room was just that. The last room. There was no other door leading away from it, and again, its only furnishing was a small table identical to the others. On that table was another picture, this time of me as I am now. Though I don't remember the photo, and I have no idea how it could have been taken without me knowing, given the distance and the angle. But more disturbing than the mystery of the photo itself was how it was presented. It was in a frame. A frame from Santa's elf village. I felt the world swim around me for a moment. How could that be right? How would I even remember a cheap frame I saw at a distance when I was 7? Sure, it said Santa's elf village on it, but how could I be sure it was the same one? And yet, I was. I reached for the final envelope from its place next to the photo, careful to avoid touching the frame as I did so. Ripping it open, I tried to read the lines written on the page it contained, but I was shaking too badly now. I finally sat the paper back on the table and read it from there, my breath coming in shallow, wheezing gasps as I tried to understand. You have been prepared, and I still have much to show you. Are you ready to begin? I was reading it the 4th time when I heard a high, delicate sound like a small bell chiming. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the far wall where there had been no next door. Except now, when I looked back, I saw that there was. And it was starting to open. I ran. I ran through the second room, the first room, up the stairs into the crawl space, and outside into the too bright noonday sun. I didn't stop running until I got in my truck, and then I was flooring it down the driveway, fishtailing onto the gravel road and barely avoiding winding up in the ditch as I overcorrected. I somehow managed to get back to the highway, and once I had a few miles distance and found a safe place to park, I tried my phone again. I got 911 right away this time, and I told them a sobbing, incoherent story about having found something bad at a house I was working at, that they needed to come and investigate. I finally managed to give them the address, and then I just sat there for a while, shaking and crying as I tried to decide what to do. I debated just going home or heading back to the office, explaining to my boss what had happened, or at least some version that would make sense to him, while making it clear we weren't doing that job. But I kept going back to the idea of returning to the house. Of course, of explaining to the cops the significance of what was down there. Sure, they'd taken my information and would probably talk to me later. But what if they missed something or didn't try as hard without knowing what they were looking for? I decided I couldn't risk it. Wiping my face, I turned around and started heading back to the house. I could see the lights through the trees before I reached the driveway, setting off a flood of relief that loosened the tension in my chest. At least they were out here looking into it. I started to turn down the driveway when I realized it wasn't just patrol cars I was seeing, but fire trucks, because the house was on fire. They wouldn't let me get close, but when I told them that I was the one that had called 911 and that it hadn't been for a house fire, the deputy nodded and told me to wait in my car until one of the investigators arrived. When she did, I gave her pretty much the same account I've told you here, except for the door that had appeared at the end of that final hall. They suspect me of arson, but of course they have no proof. But even if they believed me, they have no proof of what I'm saying either. They tell me that they do see signs of what they're calling a detached sub-basement, but anything that might have been there is either gone or destroyed by the flames. When I ask them how the fire would have gone through multiple metal doors, they just stare at me as though they are trying to be polite, trying not to call me a lunatic firebug to my face. I don't think anyone can help me. I've created a life without real attachments, with no one who trusts me or who I can trust, with no one who cares, almost completely alone. But just almost. Because I'm never really alone. I always have this constant companion, this corrosive angel, eating away at anything good in my life. The thought of this unseen curse, this invisible stalker, has always terrified me, even more so now that I know that it's real. But even that confirmation isn't the worst part. No, the worst part is what might come next. The day when I see something out of the corner of my eye or hear the crystal ringing of a small bell. And when I turn to look, I see a door that shouldn't be there, a shape that doesn't belong, a voice that reaches across the distance to burn away what little I have left with 5 small words. Are you ready to begin? Just keep smiling. It was my manager's favourite quote at my latest dead-end job. Happy electronics, where the customer is always right. Even Karen. It wasn't my first choice in employment, but with the holidays, I needed some extra cash fast. In my parents' eyes, I'd never be able to compete with my successful siblings and buy them a car. But maybe this year I can get them a gift card. Hell, maybe even a Jelly of the Month club subscription. Luckily, I wasn't the only smiling employee of the happiest store in New Hampshire. I had a few other colleagues to help collectively pass the time in the Misery Palace. My favourite, of course, was Abby. She helped train me when I first started and always had some sarcastic remark to brighten my day. It also helped that she was absolutely gorgeous, and my heart rate doubled every time we made eye contact. I'd been working up the courage to ask her out for weeks, but like most opportunities in my life, I was probably going to let this one pass me by and go play Counter-Strike in my apartment for as long as it takes to forget about it. Then there was Kevin. 5-time Employee of the Month Kevin. Each monthly portrait adorning the wall featuring the same stupid-looking creepy grin. The guy had to be obsessed with the store because he took our manager's words to heart. He never stopped smiling. A lady literally screamed at him because one of the keys on a keyboard was sticking, and his face never moved a muscle. Needless to say, we avoided him like a plague and never invited him out for drinks after closing. This monotony continued for several weeks, each day more boring than the last. Then one night, our manager decided to treat himself to a short shift. That smarmy businessman practically ran out of the door, front flipped into his Volvo, and sped off into the night, probably to go regale some poor girl with stories of his great success and his $2 cologne. This, of course, left me to close up shop with Kevin. As Abby's shift ended, she headed towards the door and waved goodbye to me. I waved too, while wrapping an invisible noose around my neck and strangling myself. She stifled one of her cute laughs and gave me a wink before closing the door behind her. The next hour passed by with the speed of a snail and about as much joy as eating one. I bid farewell to our last customer of the night, giving one final smile before locking the front door. I spun around and was startled to find Kevin standing right behind me. "Geez, man," I cried out. "Don't you knock or something?" I could tell he was just as taken aback. His face was more pale than usual. He had bags under his eyes too, like he hadn't slept in days. "Sorry," he let out meekly. "I didn't mean to surprise you. I just wanted to let you know I'm gonna start cleaning up in the back room." And with a flash of his grinning teeth, he scooted off down the aisle. I sighed and headed towards the closet to grab the broom. After I finished sweeping, I headed to the back of the store to clock out. If I hurried, maybe I could make it home in time to get a few games in with my buddies. After I moved out here, away from my family, playing games online was basically the only contact I had with my friends. It was fine with me though. I finally had the solitude I always wanted. As I opened the door to the back room, Kevin was sitting at the table and greeted me with a smile. "Damn, dude, the boss is gone. You can drop the smiling act already." Without waiting for his response, I turned and started clocking out on the computer, a process I never looked forward towards. A fancy electronics chain, and they've got us using a computer older than my niece. That was when I heard a muffled noise behind me. I glanced behind me and saw Kevin with his head in his hands. Damn, the dude was actually crying. "Hey man," I said, immediately regretting my earlier comment. "I was just teasing you. You're right." Kevin looked up at me from his hands, tears rolling down his face and into his grinning mouth. This guy had serious issues. "I'm sorry," he said between sobs. "I don't want to be like this. I don't have a choice." "What do you mean?" I asked. "If you don't like working here, then just quit. Save yourself while you still can." I met him with a half-hearted grin to try and ease the tension. You don't understand. He's always watching." "Who, the boss? Hey, I know the guy's a creep, and this is an electronics store, but it's not like he's sitting at home watching the security cameras." "No, not him," Kevin said with a cry, his gaunt face lowering toward his hand again. The laughing man," he whispered. A few seconds of silence passed. I didn't know what to say. "The laughing man?" I finally let out. "Here, home, my bedroom. It doesn't matter. He's always there. He won't leave me alone. Hey, if someone's stalking you, you should go to the police. They can—" "Not someone," he interrupted. "Something. He's always there, staring at me. He just wants me to smile. I don't know what he'll do if I stop, but I can't take much more of this," he finished softly. I didn't know what to say. It was like Kevin was having an emotional breakdown. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder to try and comfort him. "Hey man, that sounds crazy. You should really see about getting some help. My brother knows some really good doctors who could—" "You don't believe me?" he interrupted again. Fine, I'll show you. Kevin reached his long fingers towards his face and pressed them against his cheeks, holding his mouth in a straight face. I could see him struggling to keep this expression. Hey man, whatever is going on, you need to try and relax. Is there someone I can call for you? Suddenly, I heard a shuffling behind me. As I turned around, I found the noise was coming from behind the door. It continued, growing louder and closer. Kevin's face became more contorted by the second, his hands trembling. The shuffling finally reached the door and stopped. A few seconds of silence went by, when suddenly the door handle started to slowly turn. Kevin let out a scream behind me, and I turned to face him. He had released his face and was bearing an excruciating grin. The door handle had stopped turning. What the hell was that? I yelled. But Kevin was inconsolable. I raced towards the door, my outstretched hand grabbing the doorknob and yanked it open to find nothing. The store was barren and silent as a graveyard. As I looked around, Kevin stood up behind me. He walked slowly towards me, still forcing a grin. Look, I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have said anything. Please, let's just forget this happened. It's better that way. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was hoping this was just Abby or one of the guys playing a prank on me. Go ahead and go home. I'll finish locking up. I slowly nodded and left the store. My hands were shaking as I drove back to my apartment. As I reached my door, I fumbled more times than I'd like to admit, trying to put my key in the lock. Once inside, I locked the door and went straight to bed. Whatever that was that happened at work that night, I decided to confront Kevin about it in the morning. The only problem was, Kevin didn't show up for his shift. 30 minutes past the start of Kevin's shift, my manager walked by with less than a smile on his face. I don't care who that guy thinks he is, he said frustratedly, but he doesn't get to no call, no show on me. He continued, storming past me and slammed his office door. The boss man's threats didn't seem to faze Kevin though, because he didn't show up at all that day, or the next, or the next. I asked Abby if she or any of the guys had heard from him, but no one knew. It wasn't until my manager heard from the authorities that we found out the truth. Kevin was dead. The funeral came quicker than I thought. We were all invited, even though we barely knew the guy. After all, at Happy Electronics, we're all one happy family. It also seemed like we were Kevin's only family. As far as I could tell, none of his family even showed up for his funeral. I knew, because after the closed casket affair, I made a point to talk to as many people at the reception as I could. I had to know what happened to Kevin, and if he had told anyone else about the laughing man. I got more than I bargained for when I introduced myself to a man standing outside the reception building, a cigarette smoked down to the filter still in his hand. He said his name was Brad. He'd gone to school with Kevin, and they still had hung out from time to time until recent events. He also had the misfortune of being the one to find Kevin. I'm sorry, man. I'm sure you guys were close. I didn't mean to pry, I said apologetically. I've never seen anything like it. I just can't believe someone would do that. Do what? I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. I wish I'd just kept my mouth shut. Brad gazed up at me from behind his next cigarette, his eyes evaluating me before he exhaled a cloud of smoke. The police said it was a break-in, a burglary gone wrong, but no thief would do that. He paused to take another drag from his cigarette. They didn't just strangle him. It was like someone mangled his face. All I see when I close my eyes is his face. It's like he was grinning at me, man. My heart skipped a beat as he stopped speaking. This was all way too much to handle. The next few silent seconds felt like an eternity. Did Kevin ever say anything to you about the Laughing Man? I asked, hesitantly. The Laughing Man? The hell is that? Some show on Netflix? I gave him a weak smile. No, forget I said anything. I'm really sorry for your loss, I said, and went back inside the reception hall to say my goodbyes. It was another long silent drive before I made it back to my apartment. I hopped online for a bit to try and cool my nerves. When it was finally late, I decided to turn in for the night. As I crawled into bed and turned off my lamp, I pulled the covers up and closed my eyes. After a few seconds, that's when I heard it. A soft chuckle. My eyes shot open as I looked around my room. The moonlight spilling in through my window offered the only light as my eyes fell on the open closet. That's when I saw it. Teeth, long and sharp. The light from the moon danced off of them as they formed a twisted grin. I closed my eyes, hoping this was a dream, or I just imagined it. As I opened my eyes, the teeth were still there, and worse, moving towards me. As my vision grew clearer, the teeth gave way to the rest of its face. Pale, rotten skin, pulled taut in all the wrong places. Bloodshot eyes hovered above its mouth, unblinking, never averting its gaze from me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed with fear. It was all I could do to close my eyes and pray this nightmare would end. I could hear the sound of shuffling across the floor, the same noise I'd heard in the store. I opened my eyes again to find this abomination towering over me. It let out another soft laugh, its sharp teeth glistening as it reached towards me with one long, gnarled, pale hand. I did the only thing my adult mind could think of in that moment. I smiled. The creature's eyes softened, as if a wave of understanding washed over its face. Its toothy grin stretched even wider than humanly possible, and as I blinked, it was gone. The creature had completely vanished. Finally able to break my paralysis, I slammed a switch for my lamp, my eyes shooting around my bedroom and sweat dripping from my forehead. As my heart rate began to lower, I realized I was still smiling. I let my facial muscles relax and tried to catch my breath. That was when I heard it. A soft chuckle from outside my bedroom door. The shuffling noise began again, and a haunting realization came over me. Oh my God. I have to keep smiling. My mouth stretched into a forced smile, and the noises outside my door immediately stopped. I didn't know what to do. How could I smile in my sleep? An idea suddenly popped into my head, and I raced towards the kitchen. Frantically, opening one of the drawers, I found the packaging tape I procured from work. Pulling off 2 pieces of tape, I affixed them to my face. I looked in the bathroom mirror, and sure enough, my mouth was pulled into a smile. I put it to the test and allowed my face to relax as much as I could. No noises. As I went back to bed, it was several long hours of silence before I was finally able to sleep. It's been 3 weeks since that night. Every day the same routine. Smiling all day long and all night long with the help of packing tape. The nights are long, and every once in a while I take a chance to dare not to smile. But, like clockwork, I always hear it. The damn laugh. It's always there. He's always watching. I've been so stressed, I even miss Christmas with my family. They probably think I'm even more of a loser than they did before. The guys at work won't hang out with me either. They think I'm some kind of freak, trying to replace Kevin. Abby only talks to me when she has to, and I don't blame her. Things aren't all bad though. I made Employee of the Month for December. Just keep smiling. I learned of my uncle's passing 3 months ago. We weren't particularly close, but he left me one of his houses in the will. I was touched, but honestly, just wanted to sell it off as soon as possible. I'm a new father of twin girls and don't need another headache right now. To speed up the process, I travelled across the country to live in the house until a sale was assured. My job just required a laptop and phone, so I was approved to work remotely for the time being. Unfortunately, my wife had to stay at her job, so I came alone. At first, I treated it as a mini vacation. While I planned on only staying a few weeks, I didn't mind the process being more involved than I thought. The realtor took care of most things for me, and I'm still at the house a month later. I did notice strange things about the house right away. Stuff was never where I last placed it. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye. I lost track of time constantly. I thought it was caused by stress and loneliness. Except for the few times the realtor came by with prospective buyers, the house was the quietest place I'd ever been. Before I completely lost my mind, the neighbour came by with a dog. She was an elderly woman who explained that she had been dog-sitting while my uncle was in the hospital. Now that I was here, she thought I should take Buster, the golden retriever. I thought the neighbour might have been forgetful because she seemed to think my uncle had just passed last week. Either way, I fell in love with Buster, and his presence was exactly what I needed. I even thought it would be a tremendous present to bring home to my girls. I just hoped my wife would feel the same way. However, even the dog could tell something was wrong with the house. Buster accepted his new living arrangements pretty quickly, but would never willingly go upstairs. This was alright with me at the time. I thought it would make it easier to keep track of him. Then, Buster disappeared. Literally, 1 second he was standing right behind me as I was opening the treat jar to give him a snack. My eyes left him for just a moment to put the jar back, and then he was gone. I ran through the whole house, calling his name. The kitchen is connected to the living room, on the other end of which is the master bedroom and study. The other end of the kitchen leads to a dining room, which is connected to the entrance hall. That leads to the living room and stairs to the second floor. After walking upstairs, you have a choice of right or left along the balcony that overlook the living room on one side and entrance on the other. Going left leads immediately to a guest room and game room. Going right leads to 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom at the end of the hall. I looked in every room and had to accept that somehow the dog made it outside, even though there is no doggy door and every door and window had been closed and locked. So I searched the surrounding neighbourhood before giving up after an hour. I was thinking of making flyers as I opened the front door and heard Buster scrambling towards me from the kitchen. I was ecstatic, of course, but I couldn't wrap my head around how I could have missed him. I let Buster sleep in the bed with me that night and every night since. Things picked up at work though, and I soon forgot about all the strangeness surrounding the house. Clients were calling me constantly, but I got it done. I landed multiple large contracts and soon was working around the clock, but I knew I'd be due a promotion once I returned to the home office. Several times I get lost in a phone call or spreadsheet and suddenly find that it was nighttime. I'd be so absorbed with work that I could block out Buster whining for food or go outside. I started to set alarms to keep track, but I had too many important clients to slow down. I was on top of the world, but my health started to suffer. I'd forget to eat and even sleep sometimes. There was always something else to do or someone to talk to. I soon was taking better care of Buster than I was of myself. Then my good mood ended with a bang. Literally. Buster was whining behind me after I finished another spreadsheet. Then we both heard a door slam upstairs. For the first time since I brought him inside, Buster ran upstairs all by himself. I almost called the cops, but I felt silly when I had the phone in my hand. I tried to convince myself I hadn't really heard anything at all. I mean, if there were an intruder, surely Buster would have been making more noise. So, I mustered all the courage I could manage and crept upstairs with a frying pan as my weapon. It was dark upstairs, but enough moonlight came in from the downstairs windows that I could make out Buster standing in front of the bathroom. I had purposely closed every door when I last came up here, but this door was now wide open. I flipped the hallway light, but nothing happened. With no better ideas, I raised the frying pan high and walked slowly to the bathroom. There was no window in there, so it was pure darkness inside. I was terrified. Bizarrely, Buster seemed frozen in place. His tail stood straight up and he was pointed towards the door. I tried to take it as a good sign that he still hadn't barked. That's what finally got me through the threshold and into the bathroom. The whole time, my eyes were getting used to the darkness, and I quickly realized the bathroom was too small for anyone to be there without me noticing. I started to relax when I took a step forward into something sticky. I suddenly realized that I had my cell phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and turned it on to cast some light on the floor. I immediately dropped it at the sight of the bright red liquid that surrounded my feet. Even though I only had a glimpse at the floor, the image of a blood-red line slowly filling the groove between tiles was burned into my eyes. I fled the upstairs, and this triggered Buster to follow. I had no trouble calling the police when I made it back downstairs. Thankfully, there was already a patrol car nearby, so 2 officers arrived within a couple of minutes. Their powerful flashlights cut through the darkness like knives, but they soon found nothing was wrong with the upstairs lights. Instead, something was wrong with my pipes though. They called out from above that the puddle was just rusty water. Because of their insistence, I climbed up the stairs again and clearly saw a muddy brown puddle in the bathroom. The banging must have been from a pipe breaking. Both cops had a laugh at my expense, but were otherwise understanding. They even gave me a number of a good plumber, though my cell phone was ruined after I dropped and left it in the puddle. I would have to use the one landline in the kitchen from now on. I saw them out and promised to call the plumber first thing in the morning. Yet, as exhausted as I was, I couldn't go to sleep. Not after all that excitement. I stayed up to draft some more important documents for my company. Before I knew it, Buster had made another mess in the living room. I was dead tired and said things to Buster that maybe I shouldn't have, and I did some things that I know I really shouldn't have. I decided to do something about the stress I'd been under, and I spoke to my supervisor that next morning. To my surprise, they were happy to let me have a week off as a sort of mental vacation. Just like that, all my outstanding work was taken away. With nothing else to do, I was finally able to focus on Buster. I played games with him and fed him a bunch of treats to make up for my earlier neglect. Then I found the first message. I didn't notice it for some time since I'd been avoiding the second floor, but I suddenly realized that I'd never gotten around to calling the plumber. Before doing so, I went upstairs to see if things had gotten any worse. Instead, I immediately saw a message written in red on the hallway wall. It read, "Losing your mind?" For a second, I kinda did. I was scared to death of the thought that someone had snuck into my house while I was there, probably while I was sleeping. I won't bear repeating everything I said or did right after. Let's just say I hadn't become any braver since the banging incident. Eventually, I made my way to the kitchen with Buster leading the way. I called the police again. Those two same officers were able to show up, and then, slowly, we cleared every inch of the house. Yet we found no one. Everything was locked. No sign of forced entry. The police actually took me seriously, something that surprised me at the time. Instead, they admitted that there had been a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. Nothing was ever stolen, but the police officers still offered to have a car sit outside for the night. I appreciated the gesture, but declined because I had no intention of staying. I knew I'd never get to sleep tonight. Not in this house. So I called my only friend in town, an old college roommate who coincidentally lived 30 minutes away. He offered to pick me and Buster up in a few hours, so I busied myself with packing up my suitcase. I didn't want to ever come back, so I pretty much packed everything I had brought with me to the house in the first place. I left my room to pick up some doggy toys when my friend called to say he was waiting outside. I decided to hang up the phone and meet him immediately. I needed the human company, and he could help me move my stuff. But the driveway was empty. There was no friend, no car. I called him back immediately, and he insisted he was outside. I listened to him get out of his car and walk up to the front door. He knocked, and I could hear the door open, and an elderly woman greet him. My friend asked for me by name and even mentioned my uncle. The woman said she had never heard of either of us. After thanking her, my friend left and asked if I'd gotten all that. I told him I must have given him the wrong address, but he was able to rattle off the correct one and confirm he was there. After asking him to wait and I left the house again, I walked out to the street and looked back at the numbers written on the curb and on the mailbox. Only, there weren't any numbers, just a message. "Losing your mind?" was written on the curb, in bright red. The temptation to leave right away was great. I could just start walking and never stop. But I had to get my stuff and, more importantly, Buster. So I entered the house one last time. When I came back to the room, my suitcase was empty. Everything I had just spent the last hour packing up was back in its proper place. Despite how impossible this was, I focused on my one and only goal. I needed to leave. I put a leash on Buster and was shocked to see how haggard he was. I resolved to make it up to him when this was all over. I tried to leave out the front door like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't open it. The knob turned freely, but the deadbolt wouldn't slide back. I was really scared, but Buster's presence helped. I knelt down to give him a hug, and he gave me an idea while licking my face. Whatever was happening, it sure wasn't the result of a maniac hiding in my house. Still, I didn't know what forces were actually opposing me, so I walked to the backyard and said loudly, "Well, Buster, time for a walk." The glass door slid open easily. Buster bounded out happily. I guess it had been a long time since I let him outside. I followed more tentatively, and, for the first time, examined the backyard closely. There was an iron fence surrounding the yard with enough space between the bars that Buster could slip through. And then I saw it. A tree that grew too close to the fence and had several branches extending through and above it. I assumed the gate would be supernaturally locked too, so this was my exit. Buster didn't need prodding. He waited patiently for me on the other side as I painfully pulled myself up and over the fence. I was suddenly aware of how weak and tired my recent lifestyle had made me. When I was in the process of climbing down the tree on the other side, Buster growled once and then took off like a shot towards a nearby hill. I jumped down and gave chase. He disappeared over the top, and I scrambled to keep up on the surprisingly steep surface. Luckily, I found out where someone had laid some stone bricks to the side for an easier way up. It was still steep enough that I had to focus on placing my feet correctly to keep from sliding. So, I was looking down when my next reach up resulted in my hand grabbing carpet. Confused, I looked up to see the second floor landing. I looked down to see the rest of the stairs that led to the entrance hall and living room of the house. Buster was nowhere to be found. Demoralized and dead tired, I crawled the final steps and just sat on the landing for a while, occasionally calling for Buster. Eventually, the kitchen phone rang. Whatever ghosts were messing with me, I realized they couldn't stop outside forces from helping. I tumbled down the stairs in my haste and landed hard on the cold tiles below. But I was only dazed for a second and soon was in the kitchen with a phone in my hand. My wife's warm voice filled me with hope. She was concerned that she hadn't heard from me in a while. I couldn't recall the last time I'd even tried to reach out myself. She was trying to tell me that my work hadn't heard from me in a week, while I tried to tell her to call the police. Her words gave me pause though. I asked, "What do you mean? I was given the week off." "Dear, I thought you were supposed to continue working as soon as you got there." Yeah, but they gave me a week off because of all the stress I've been under." "Wait a second. How long have I been out here?" "Honey, you've been gone almost 9 days now." My stomach sunk, but I didn't hesitate to say, "Listen, you need to call the cops. Something's wrong. I think I'm having a medical emergency." I'd just been trying to come up with an excuse to limit the amount of follow-up questions, but I ended up realizing that this was actually the most likely explanation. Maybe I was suffering from a gas leak or brain tumor. Ironically, either of those options seemed preferable than living in a haunted house. My wife asked, "Baby, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I thought I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye as I answered, "Yeah, I'm okay, but no, look, I just need help. There's something wrong about this house." "You aren't making any sense. Just listen to me. Call the police and tell him my uncle's name. Tell them to come to this house and an ambulance might be needed. Please help me." "Please help you? Please? Pretty please with a cherry on top?" I stared at the phone in my hand as my wife's voice continued to come out of it. It sounded like her, but in a mocking tone I've never actually heard from her before. She said, "You're such a baby. Does your tummy hurt too? When's the last time you ate? I wonder if Buster can actually help you out there." I slammed the phone down, but whatever it was on the other side was right. My stomach was hurting. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. On cue, I heard Buster whining from upstairs. Only after I started running towards the stairs did I notice just how bruised and sore my legs were from the spill down those steps. I pushed through the pain and climbed the stairs yet again. Buster was back in front of the bathroom, lying on his side and looking thinner than I'd ever seen him. "Losing your mind" was written all over the hallway now, including the ceiling and floor. I no longer had any doubt the messages were written in blood. Some of them were still dripping. I saw some of Buster's fur was matted with blood, and suddenly realized how the messages were being written. No wonder Buster looked so frail. Somehow the ghosts or demons haunting this place were able to draw the blood right out of my pet. I walked up and picked up Buster. At the same time, a banging started at my front door. I would have jumped if Buster hadn't been weighing me down. I heard the front door open, and whoever it was identified themselves as the police. I even recognized the voice as belonging to one of the officers who had visited previously. Why can't I remember his name? After calling out that I was upstairs, I turned with Buster and found the hallway stretched before me, many times its original length. Despite how thin he looked, Buster felt heavier than before. I knew this was all just some sort of trick to not get me in touch with the police officer. I thought I must have really been talking to my wife. She had come through with calling the police, and the ghosts just distorted the end of the call. So I started my trek back to the stairs and shuffled my feet as fast as I could, yelling all the way. But then a voice answered the police officer. A woman's voice. My wife's voice. I could hear her saying, "I'm sorry, my husband wasn't feeling well. He's resting in the bedroom. Can I help you?" I screamed as loud as I could, just to get attention. But it was no use. I heard the officer say, "I'd like to check up on him all the same." Sure, come in. He's right through here." It was right out of a nightmare. I was sweating profusely, while every step seemed to get me nowhere. I tried to speed up, but the hallway just stretched further. And then I heard a man's blood-curdling scream from downstairs. Suddenly, the hallway snapped back, and I found myself somehow right at the top of the stairs. My momentum couldn't be stopped, and I fell down the stairs and landed hard on top of Buster. He howled in pain, but at least he was alive. I saw a long, thick trail of blood go around the corner and under my closed bedroom door. There was still a shadow of something under the door. I painfully crept to the kitchen and grabbed my trusty frying pan before making my way back to the bedroom door as quietly as I could. Once again, I found myself staring at a bright red line of blood that stretched across the floor. I felt like I was on the verge of remembering something important, but I had no time to dwell on it. I tore my eyes from the blood and watched the moving shadows under the door. Whatever was waiting there had killed a man. That meant it could kill me. But if it could have a physical impact, then surely it had to be susceptible to a physical impact too. So I raised the frying pan and slowly started to turn the handle. Before I made much progress, the door flew open on its own and something turned suddenly to me. I swung my frying pan down. The cop stood before me, a smile frozen on his face. We both looked down at the knife plunged into his chest. My hand was still wrapped around the handle. He fell to the side and I fell backwards to sit heavily on the now clean floor. I was positive I had picked up the frying pan. I could remember its weight, but now I also remembered going to the kitchen and pulling out the knife. I seriously wondered if I was losing my mind. I looked down to find I had the kitchen knife in my hands again. I dropped it at once and crawled back to check on Buster. He wasn't moving. I put my head on his flank. I was devastated to feel he was still warm, but not breathing. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I did nothing for a long time. I was lethargic, but somehow made it to the couch in the living room. I waited there until nightfall and then slept on the couch. When I woke up, I waited some more. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but nothing horrible was happening to me while I waited. I wasn't in a hurry to change that. But the bodies of Buster and the cop were still there. I needed to do something. My stomach rumbled as I finally got off the couch. That was another problem with just staying put. First things first, I found a shovel in an outdoor closet attached to the backyard porch. Digging the hole was exhausting, so I settled for just burying Buster now. I planned on getting to the cop after finding something to eat. I picked up Buster and carried him outside. His fur was still so warm. It was hard to believe he was gone, but there was no life behind those big brown eyes. I laid him gently down in the hole and got to work. Sometime later, I wandered into the kitchen and raided the pantry. The house was quiet apart from my efforts. Whenever I stopped moving, the silence was complete. I wondered if the ghosts had just been trying to make me a murderer after all. Now that the goal had been met, maybe they would leave me alone for a while. Just in time, because I was starving and didn't need any more distractions. I opened a box of cereal and had a handful up to my lips when I paused. How could I tell I was actually eating what I was looking at? What if I had actually been opening a box of rat poison? I still wasn't sure what these ghosts were capable of. I imagined the food turning into worms after it was already in my mouth. With that thought, I threw the cereal to the ground and stomped off, no longer hungry. I needed to concentrate my efforts on leaving this place. Right on cue, I walked by the front door. It was open. Instinctively, I made a leap for it before stopping with my outstretched hand just a foot short of the door. This had to be another trick. I could see the door slamming shut in my face, or even taking a few of my fingers with it. I could feel a breeze enter the house, but I was too scared to move. This was the most impossible situation I'd ever been in or even heard of. All of my senses had failed me before. However, my need for freedom eventually caused my feet to move. Upon slowly exiting the house, I saw the cop car just sitting in my driveway. The door was unlocked and the keys were sitting in the front seat. My mind went wild, trying to explain the situation. Maybe the cop was secretly a murderer and had killed previous owners of this house. Maybe his sacrifice helped them move on. I couldn't think of any other explanation for my good luck at the time, so I pushed my misgivings down and got in. I drove out of the neighborhood without incident, but I had new problems. I was in an unfamiliar city, driving a cop car with no money or other belongings on me, and I had no idea what to do next. So, I kept driving. It felt good to be free of that house. It felt good to see the sun. So I kept driving, on and on. Left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn. No idea where I was going. And then I realized I hadn't seen any other cars on the road for some time. Where was everyone? Where was I? The sinking feeling happened again, in the pit of my stomach, but also around my whole body. I sunk back into the car seat, and then realized I was sitting in an armchair, back in the living room of my uncle's house. My arms were up like I was holding onto a steering wheel. I started to cry with frustration as I stood up and screamed. How long had I been sitting there with a stupid grin, moving my arms up and down like a madman? I turned around and saw my work laptop on the dining room table. It was on and glowing at me. I walked over to it and saw that a YouTube video was playing. The opening title card read, "Lost your mind? Good. Now it's time to lose the rest." Suddenly, my fist felt weighed down. I raised it to find another kitchen knife in my hand. I dropped it immediately. The video continued to show when I first learned of my uncle's passing. Then I watched the reading of the will, and then my first day in this house, all from my perspective. I watched myself moving in and unpacking. I broke down in tears as I saw my neighbor bringing Buster to me for the first time. Then I watched all the events I've just described happen again. This time around, I saw no, or at least less illusions. I witnessed myself kill the cop. I watched as I sat in the chair and pretended to drive around. Again, I felt my hand grow heavy, but instead of another weapon, I raised the video camera. It was still recording. When I reached the point where I was seeing the laptop and this same YouTube video, my on-screen persona produced the rope and filmed himself tying it to the upstairs balcony. I went to turn off the video before I saw what happened next, but I found a rope in my other hand. I dropped it, and in my disgust, I slammed the video camera into the laptop screen. Immediately, I regretted not using the laptop to try and send out a message, but I couldn't remember ever bringing the laptop out to the dining room in the first place. Sure enough, I found an unbroken laptop in the study. I opened my email and started to type out a request for help. But I kept hitting the wrong keys and another message slowly formed. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time, goodbye. I tried it again and again, but I kept getting the same result. My real words weren't reaching anyone. I knew then that I was never going to leave this house. Somewhere along the line, something broke inside of me. I started to feel this pressure, this inevitable end that is getting closer and closer. I'm going to die. But make no mistake, regardless of what state my body is in or any of the messages you find around me, this was no suicide. I still don't know who my murderer is, but I can feel them out there. They are absolutely responsible for what is happening to me. Either way, I tried writing an email to the local police department when the webpage refreshed, and I found myself staring at another YouTube video. This time, it was just a narration of the same events I saw in the previous video. I had no interest in listening, but I was struck by one detail. A bright red line slowly crept across the screen. I slammed the lid down on my laptop, but I couldn't get that blood red out of my head. Not just that image, but a phrase also kept running through my head. End of the line. It's the end of the line for me. A part of me felt like it had clicked into place. I was probably going insane, but I had understood something true about this world. Still, I couldn't think of any practical applications for this truth, and I was probably still going insane. Wait, did I already say that? I'm sorry, it's getting harder to concentrate. I found an old tape recorder in my desk drawer, and I felt like it was a good idea to start narrating everything that has happened to me. If anyone is there, if you're listening, it's to this recording I'm making with that tape recorder. Somehow, it being older technology makes me feel better, but hearing my narration out loud feels too familiar. Have I done this before? I'm beginning to believe this isn't just because of ghosts. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and the truth is simply that I have no idea what's going on. All I know is that I wished I never inherited this cursed house from my grandfather. I wonder what horrors he might have endured in this place himself. I'm sorry, did I say grandfather? I meant uncle, I think. But I can't really recall my uncle's name, or what he looked like. Now, I'm not sure I ever had an uncle. Come to think of it, how did I get here? Did I fly? Drive? I can't remember. Have I always been here? Even weirder, I can't remember my realtor's name, or even what gender they are. I've met them in person several times. Why don't I know things I should? I can't even remember the name of my daughters or my wife. Am I even a father? Am I even a person? I know I must be, because here I am, in this small study, talking into a tape recorder. But now that I think about it, I can't remember who my parents are, what they look like, or anything about my childhood. Now, I just remember this house and all the nightmares, waking and otherwise, I've experienced here. I'm feeling a lot like I was back in the cop car. I found a way forward, but I really don't know what to do next. This is not a way to live, and I'm getting more and more tired. I'm so hungry, and I'm finding it harder to focus. I keep hearing voices, and they're getting louder. There is one other truth I've come to realize. I know I won't last long if I stop talking. There's just this feeling in my gut that the end will come shortly after I stop the tape. But I'm running out of things to say. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. I need to keep talking, but I don't know what to say anymore. I've caught you up with what's happened in the house. At least what I can remember. What's my name? But nothing else ever happened to me. I can't tell you about what hasn't happened to me. I'll die if I stop talking. A, B, C, E, R, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, Q, R, S, V, Y, W, X, and Z. Next time won't you sing with me? I'm so tired and hungry. Buster. I miss Buster. I wish I could pet him one last time. But was he ever real? Is anything? I'm so tired, so hungry. I need to focus. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Maybe I should start over. I wish I could just rewind all this. I learned of my uncle's passing 3 months ago. We weren't particularly close, but he left me one of his houses in the will. I was touched, but honestly just wanted to sell it off as soon as possible. I'm a new father of twin girls, and I don't need another headache to manage right now. Okay, what happened next? Come on, I'm going to die if I can't remember. I'm going to die, and then someone else will see the blood pour out. They'll see my blood stretched across this grey floor. I'm sorry, I'm just rambling now. I hope you all understand how scary this is for me. I'm alive now. I just want to keep this last time going forever. And now I'm resorting to just repeating things over and over and over and over. I'm so tired of all this. Maybe I should have been trying to find a way to fast forward instead of rewind. I'm sorry I've disappointed you. I hope you all understand how scary it is to say goodbye. I'm alive, and I want to keep the last time going. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time. Goodbye. I immediately felt annoyed as I noticed my sister, Jenna, calling me. Their car should have been at the cabin more than 20 minutes prior, yet I'd somehow managed to arrive there before them. Hey sis, where are you at? I asked, half surprised, and a bit worried that they'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, which wouldn't have been too out of character for Jenna, with her absolutely non-existent sense of direction. What I got in response was a static mess of sound that blared from my phone at full volume before it quickly cut off and the call disconnected. Out in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't an uncommon occurrence, and I figured if I drove back down the road, I'd get a few bars of signal. Our lonesome cabin was situated only a 3-hour drive from the closest town, in the most desolate part of the country, only accessible by a road that had gone without maintenance for what seemed like a century. To most, it might feel like a post-apocalyptic wasteland, but for us, it was the perfect escape from the noise surrounding New Year's Eve. The plan had been to drive together, but with work keeping me back and them driving ahead, we'd split up. Even then, it wasn't the first time we'd driven there, so she should have known the way. I called Jenna again once I got a few bars on my phone, and once she answered, it became clear how distressed she was. In the background, I could hear her 2 kids crying, and Jenna doing her best to keep calm. Jenna, what's going on? I asked, my annoyance quickly turning to worry. We hit something on the road, she said. What, you mean like a deer or something? I asked. I don't know. I hit my head pretty bad when we crashed. Didn't get a good look at it. It fell into a ditch somewhere. Her voice shook with each spoken word. and whether it be from the impact or a rush of adrenaline, she sounded like she was on the verge of tears. "Damn, are you alright?" "Yeah, I'm just a bit shook up, but..." she trailed off. She stopped speaking, and I could hear her walking away, trying not to alert the kids to the situation. I can't get the car started again. Could you please come pick us up? It's dark, and the kids are getting scared." "Of course. Where are you?" "At the T-junction on Glover Road, but..." She stopped mid-sentence, as if something had cut her off. "Sis, you alright?" "Yeah, please, just come." I'd already started the car back up before she asked. It wouldn't be more than a 20-minute drive back to Glover Road, and though it was dark without reflective signs and frozen ground, I could get there before she started completely panicking. "Alright, I'm on my way. I'll call you when I get close," I said. She thanked me, and I hung up. The landscape around me was dimly lit up by my headlights, revealing frozen glass and leafless trees. During the day, it looked like any other winter wonderland, but in the dark, it could bring out the shivers in even the most seasoned adventurer. Once I'd gotten about halfway there, my sister's name lit up on the phone. I slowed to a halt and picked it up, not willing to drive and talk under these circumstances. "Hey, what's up?" Are you far away?" she asked nervously. "I'm about halfway. I won't be long. Why are you calling?" She paused for a second before responding, breathing erratically as she mulled over what to say. "It's just that..." she trailed off. "What?" "The thing I hit. It's moving." "The thing? You mean the deer?" "No, it's not a... it's something else. I don't know." "What?" "I don't know. Please, just hurry." Confused as to why she called me a second time, and annoyed that I would have almost been there if not for the disturbance, I hung up and kept driving. After a few minutes, I pulled onto Glover Road and continued towards the junction. I put on the high beam to make sure I didn't accidentally crash into my stranded sister or whatever she had collided with herself. As I arrived at the junction, I saw no sign of a crash and realized that despite my sister's instruction, she might be on the wrong road entirely. Keeping me company was nothing but the cold and an old wooden sign that read Glover Road, with Jensen Street going up from the junction. I sighed and called my sister for a third time. "Jack?" she said, sounding absolutely terrified. "Yeah, I'm here already, but you're not," I said. "You sure you broke down on Glover Road?" She didn't respond, but I could hear her trembling breath and crying kids on the other end of the line. "Sis, you okay?" "It got back up," she whispered in shock. "What did?" "The thing we hit. It got back up and ran off into the woods." "What was it?" "I don't know. I couldn't get my flashlight in time. It was too fast, but it was tall. It ran on 2 legs. It didn't look like any animal I've ever seen," she said. While the forests in the area were known to house many strange creatures, and bizarrely large elks, nothing fit the description my sister had just given me. Though what irked me more than the strange animal she'd hit were her whereabouts. "Hey Jen, let's just do a video call, then you can show me your surroundings, and I'll come pick you up," I said nonchalantly, trying to keep her calm. "Okay, but it's pretty dark, and my camera sucks," she responded. We turned over to a video call, and she brought up the flashlight to give me an inkling as to where she was. "Look, here's the sign," she said as she pointed a camera towards an old wooden sign. "Glover Road, Jensen Street," the sign read, just like the one I stood next to. "Wait, that doesn't make any sense. I said, and showed her the same sign on my end, proving that we were in the same location, yet couldn't see each other. "But where are you?" she asked. "I'm literally in the same spot as you. I don't understand," I said, a hint of fear showing through my voice. "Look, I'll just call the police. I don't know what other option we have. Just stay by the car and I'll call you right," I said, before I was interrupted. "No, wait," she practically yelled on the other end. She pointed a camera towards the tree line, her flashlight barely reaching across the road, creating nothing more than a pathetic outline of the trees, and something moving between them. "Do you see that?" she asked. "Is that the thing you hit?" I asked. Before she got a chance to answer, the figure shot out from the trees, becoming clear in the light. There it stood, 10 feet tall, a bizarre mixture of animals merged together with bones protruding through its pale skin. His face was nothing more than a mangled lump of flesh, poorly fitted to its body, and in the centre lay a massive hole, resembling a disgusting mix between a mouth and a singular eye. "Oh God, what is that thing?" she yelled. It let out a broken roar before it charged at my sister, crossing the distance between them in just under a second. She pulled back towards the children, grabbing onto Laura, her 2-year-old, who'd inexplicably gotten loose from her seat, and shoved her into the car. As she turned to help Alex, the creature lunged past her, grabbing onto the 10-year-old and snatching him away within a second. "No, let him go! Alex!" my sister yelled. But the thing had long since retreated back into the woods. I quickly glanced over at the tree line from where the creature came, but on my side, it was empty. A world occupied by nothing more than darkness. Whatever separated my sister and I, it wasn't distance. "Help!" she called out. "Alex! I'm going to call the police. Hold on." I hung up and dialed the number. No response. I checked my phone to make sure I still had 2 bars of signal, yet no connection could be made. I tried a second and third time to no avail. Help would not come. After the hopeless attempt, I called Jenna back. Jack? She stuttered as she picked up. "I'm sorry, I couldn't get a hold of them. Are you alright? We're inside the car, but there's more of them now. They're circling around us. They took Alex." She got out between sobs. "Just stay in the car, Jenna. I'm going to drive down the road and look for help." I put my phone down on the dashboard and kept the call going, talking to Jenna as I sped down the road, promising, lying that everything would be alright. "Jack, they're leaving," she exclaimed, with the faintest hint of relief in her voice. I let out a breath, slowing down my car a bit as I let myself believe the worst had passed, trying to avoid another unfortunate collision. "That's great, Jenna, but stay in the car until I get back," I ordered. "But Alex, he's still out there. Look, I know it's hard, but Alex, he's..." Before I could finish the sentence, something could be heard in the background. It was her son, crying and calling for help. But something about his voice was off. The emotion in his calls were practically non-existent, his cries unnatural, as if they were nothing but a poor imitation of a human being. "Alex!" Jenna cried, opening the door without hesitation to go out and save a child. "Jenna, no!" I yelled, but it was too late. She'd already stepped out through the door, and no sooner did her foot hit the ground before one of the creatures bounced onto her, snapping her arm in half. She dropped the phone, and in the struggle, I could hear the car door closing with Laura still inside, while Jenna was torn to pieces by the horrific creatures. I kept driving against my strongest desire to turn around and help, but I knew that I could do nothing to reach her, no matter how hard I tried. "Jenna!" I yelled, but the call had long since disconnected, leaving me alone in absolute silence. As I sped down the road, I kept trying to call the police, but no matter how strong my signal was, I couldn't reach anyone. Even while going far over the speed limit, it took an hour and a half to reach the nearest little village. Once I drove into a more populated area, I managed to flag down a police car that happened to pass by. While I told them what was mostly an incomprehensible mess of words, they managed to get the gist that someone was hurt, including a child. I headed back towards Glover Road on board the police cruiser while I unsuccessfully tried to reconnect with Jenna. Another 2 hours passed, driving down the icy roads, and once we got there, I was more than surprised to be met by their wreck of a car. Jenna and Alex were nowhere to be seen, but in one final act of defiance, my sister had managed to lock the doors from outside, preventing her youngest, Laura, from getting out. The little girl sat crying inside her car, her entire world shattered in the span of just an hour, as her entire family had gone missing. The police did a thorough search, but couldn't find the remains of neither the monster or Jenna. As far as the evidence showed, they'd never existed on that road. Whatever I told them, it was limited to what I'd heard on the phone, and Laura, being 2, had little she could say, as much as she wanted her mother back. Had my sister not decided to leave early, and work not keeping me late, we might have driven the same car, and all of us could have either been fine or died a horrific death together. I wish there was more to the story, that I could have given you all a happy ending, but instead, I'll have to leave you with these simple instructions. If you ever break down on Glover Road, stay in your car and pray that someone else happens to drive by.